was Jeroboam, and what was he promised by God? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 1 Kings on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 26 to 43. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 26. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Kings chapter 11, beginning at verse 26. Then Solomon's servant Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zeredah, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also rebelled against the king. And this is what caused him to rebel against the king. Solomon had built the Milo and repaired the damages of the city of David his father. The man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor, and Solomon, seeing that the young man was industrious, made him the officer over all the labor force of the house of Joseph. Now it happened at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite met him on the way, and he had clothed himself with a new garment, and the two were alone in the field. And then Ahijah took hold of the new garment that was on him, and tore it into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, Take for yourself 10 pieces. And thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Behold, I will tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give 10 tribes to you. But he shall have 1 tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, because they have forsaken me, and worship Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the god of the people of Ammon, and have not walked in my ways to do what is right in my eyes, and keep my statutes and my judgments, as did his father David. However, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, because I have made him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose, because he kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand, and will give it to you, 10 tribes. And to his son I will give 1 tribe, that my servant David may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen for myself to put my name there. So I will take you, and you shall reign over all your heart desires, and you shall be king over Israel. Then it shall be, if you heed all that I command you, walk in my ways, and do what is right in my sight, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as my servant David did, then I will be with you, and build for you an enduring house, as I built for David, and will give Israel to you. And I will afflict the descendants of David because of this, but not forever. Solomon therefore sought to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt, to Shishak king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the Acts of Solomon? And the period that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. Then Solomon rested with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his place. We are now coming to the end of Solomon's reign. That reign started out promising, with God providing Solomon a great amount of wisdom that allowed him to properly judge Israel. Solomon built the temple of God and was very religious before God, as 1 Kings 3:3 said, that Solomon loved all the Lord and walked in all his statutes, except that he burned incense in the high places. Before the temple was built, and as long as Solomon didn't worship idols at these high places, God seemed to overlook this. But of course, Solomon did worship other gods at these high places, the gods of his wives, which angered the Lord. So much so that Solomon was told that the kingdom would be rent from him, but in the lifetime of his son. There would be 1 tribe that followed after Solomon's son for David's sake and for the sake of Jerusalem. In other words, the house of David would continue to have kings. But the rest of Israel would follow after another. But lest we think that Solomon didn't suffer at all, he did. For there were adversaries raised up against him in Edom and Syria that loosened his grip on the nations that surrounded him. Recall the promise to Abraham that his seed would control land from the river of Egypt to the river Euphrates. It was only Solomon that achieved this promise fully, but it wasn't held for long, and even began to erode during his lifetime. But that again wasn't God's fault. It was the fault of man living in sin. The biggest threat to Solomon, though, wasn't from without. It was from within, specifically from a man named Jeroboam. Jeroboam is introduced to us as the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite, and a servant of Solomon over the labor force of the house of Joseph, which is Ephraim and Manasseh. Noting Jeroboam's heritage is important, as we need to remember the political rifts in Israel between the house of Judah and the house of Ephraim. These have existed ever since the days of Joshua, if not before, and although Israel was united under Solomon, that unity was really only surface deep, with the undercurrents of unrest ready to resurface at a moment's notice. In this case, the problem for Jeroboam was the rebuilding of the Milo in Jerusalem. Recall from 1 Kings 9, the Milo was likely a fortification tower or a rampart on the wall in Jerusalem. What could Jeroboam's problem have been with that? Well, from chapter 12, we know there were heavy burdens placed on Israel by Solomon during these building projects, and so it is quite likely, since the Milo was one of Solomon's later projects, that Jeroboam began to become disenchanted with the cost that all these projects were having on the people, especially his people, seemingly without any benefit to them, for Jerusalem was only one city, and a city in Judah at that. So Jeroboam rebelled. But Jeroboam couldn't overthrow Solomon, like Absalom had with David, for God would not allow Jeroboam to do so, meaning that Jeroboam had to flee to Shishak, Pharaoh of Egypt, until Solomon died. But before he left, Ahijah the Shilonite met with him in a field outside of Jerusalem to tell him of future events that would affect him. It is here that Jeroboam learns that it is God's intention to rend the kingdom from Solomon due to Solomon's idolatry. How God would do this is represented in a new garment that Ahijah was wearing. As a new garment, it was in perfect condition without any tears. However, Ahijah took his garments, ripped it into 12 pieces. These 12 pieces represented the 12 tribes of Israel. Ahijah told Jeroboam to take 10 pieces, which would represent the number of tribes that would follow him. As for the house of Solomon, he would have one tribe that would follow after him, due to the promises made to the house of David and the promises made concerning the city of Jerusalem. Now, the picture given to us here has caused a lot of people confusion due to what we already know and what we will soon find out. First of all, if you add 10 and 1 together, you get 11 pieces and not 12. So what of this other tribe that that piece of cloth represented? Who would this other tribe follow? Well, from chapter 12, we find out that this 12th tribe is the tribe of Benjamin, who would remain loyal to the house of David. So problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. For earlier in the chapter, and even here in Ahijah's words, it is said that the house of David would receive one tribe due to Solomon's rebellion. So how would two tribes fit this description? Some commentators seek to solve this problem by stating that the numbers are to be taken symbolically here, with 10 representing completeness, and therefore Jeroboam is being promised to be the complete ruler over the tribes that would follow him. But that still leaves us with one piece of cloth unaccounted for. If this is the proper view, what are we to make of what it represents? And the fact of the matter is, other than the number 10 representing completion, the rest of the symbolism falls apart with what is left, meaning there has to be another explanation. And for that, all we have to do is examine what Ahijah did and what he said, and we can understand what's going on. Ahijah tore his cloth into 12 pieces, with each piece obviously representing one tribe. He then gave 10 pieces to Jeroboam and said that these pieces represented the 10 tribes that would be given to Jeroboam. 10 literal tribes. That left Ahijah with 2 pieces. Now, I don't think Ahijah was stupid in not knowing how many pieces were left, or that he misspoke when he then said that one tribe would follow the house of David. The 2 tribes that were left were Judah and Benjamin. Judah, of course, was the largest among the tribes, and Benjamin was one of, if not the smallest of the tribes. They still existed autonomously, but after the days of Saul, were often grouped together as one unit. We will see this in chapter 12, verse 20, when we find that only Judah followed Rehoboam, but then in the very next verse find Rehoboam intending to raise up an army to fight the north from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. That their political alliance should be so close should not surprise us, for the first 3 kings of Israel came from their tribes, and Jerusalem sat on both of their borders. Realizing that sometimes Benjamin and Judah are referred to separately and sometimes as one unit helps us understand what is going on here. From God's promise to Solomon, it is reasonable to assume that only Judah would follow after the house of David when the kingdom was split. But from the words of Ahijah, we find that our view was incorrect. 10 tribes would split with Jeroboam and 2 tribes would remain, with Benjamin and Judah being referred to as one unit rather than 2 tribes. Now, what of Simeon, you might ask? Weren't there tribal boundaries within Judah's? Yes, but as we'll see when the division takes place, there are people among the north who move to Judah in order to remain loyal to the house of David, and there are those who go in the opposite direction. Passages like 2 Chronicles 15 verse 9 would suggest that many of the house of Simeon moved north, thus showing us why 10 tribes were used to represent the north by Ahijah here. The promise by God to Jeroboam here wasn't just of kingship, though, but of an enduring house, like that which was promised to the house of David. God wasn't changing his promise concerning a Messiah here, but he was stating that the house of Jeroboam would live on after him, meaning Israel wouldn't reunite immediately after his death. But that promise was contingent on Jeroboam following the statutes of God, something that we'll see that neither him nor any who would come after him would do. And so that promise was never realized. But it could have been had Jeroboam obeyed God. With Ahijah having spoken, Jeroboam escaped Israel to Egypt, knowing that he would return. How long he was in Egypt, we're not entirely sure, but it could be anywhere from 10 to 12 years based on the internal chronology of the book that we've studied thus far. As for Solomon, he reigned over Israel for 40 years in total before dying at a much younger age than his father did, likely in his early 60s, with Rehoboam, his son, taking the throne in his place. With Solomon's death, we come to the close of the 120-year reign of Israelite kings known to us as the United Monarchy. What will follow is about 350 years of division and sin that will ultimately lead to the captivity of Israel by Assyria and Judah by Babylon. Before closing, many people like to ask about the eternal destiny of Solomon. Will he be in heaven or hell? Well, we can know for sure. If he died in the spiritual condition he was at the beginning of this chapter, he won't be in heaven. However, if he is the author of the book of Ecclesiastes, as I believe he is, and he obtained the attitude found in the final chapter of that book, the whole duty of man is to fear God and keep his commandments, for all the rest is vanity, then perhaps there's hope for Solomon yet. But that will be up to God, the judge of the living and the dead, so that's all we can comment on that for now. For us, let's be found faithful following God by obeying Jesus according to the Scriptures, so that our eternal destiny can be certain to be with God. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 1 to 15, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.